Well, guys, some stuff happened in the last couple days. Just some things, some world events have occurred that have gotten a lot of people's attention, particularly here in America. You know, there's been some people talking about it, doing live updates on it, and you all may be surprised to find out I've been mostly media blind to this topic. A large part of it is, like, being permanently banned from Twitter. But you know, that kind of limits my ability to keep up on all the, like, news that's going on in the world, so it's made me very disconnected from what's going on, but honestly a lot, like, happier and less anxiety-riddled, too. But I haven't really kept up on what's going on with the conflict between Israel and Palestine the last couple days. My general understanding is that there was a massive attack on Israel that did not successfully get repelled by the Iron Dome. A shit ton of people died, and in response, Israel plans to glass every Palestinian off the face of the Gaza Strip and throughout. They plan to basically initiate the genocide protocol in response. That's basically my understanding. Zan, it's worse. Israel knew it was coming. Is that confirmed? Well, I don't... We're going to read an article about it now. Apparently, it was the largest killing of Jews in 48 hours under the Holocaust, so since the Holocaust. That's a pretty bad look. Hamas is obviously awful. No support for Hamas, but also no support for Israel. You know, I hate them both. What I care more about are the civilians that aren't really involved in the fighting, although in the case of Israel, pretty much every person there is part of the military, who's a citizen, from my understanding. And in regards to Gaza and the Palestinians, it's a whole lot of just random people that are just bystanders getting caught in the crossfire and dying. A lot of them being children. A lot of them being children. One of Israel's favorite targets are locations where there's likely to be children, hospitals, you know, medical tents, things like that. They love targeting injured people, old people, and children. So yeah, real fucked up stuff. Anyway, how Israel's feared security services failed to stop Hamas's attack. Israel's military and espionage services are considered among the world's best, but on Saturday, operational and intelligence failures led to the worst breach of Israeli defense in half a century. Shortly before attackers from Gaza poured into Israel at dawn on Saturday, Israeli intelligence detected a surge in activity on some of the Gazan militant networks it monitors. Realizing something unusual was happening, they sent an alert to the Israeli soldiers guarding the Gazan border, according to two junior Israeli security officials. But the warning wasn't acted upon, either because the soldiers didn't get it, or the soldiers didn't read it. Oh, so that's what you were referencing. Shortly afterward, Hamas, the group that controls Gaza, sent drones to disable some of the Israeli military's cellular communication stations and surveillance towers along the border, preventing the duty officers from monitoring the area remotely with video cameras. The drones also destroyed remote-controlled machine guns that Israel had installed on its border fortifications, removing a key means of combating a ground attack. That made it easier for Hamas assailants to approach and blow up parts of the border fence and bulldoze it in several places with surprising ease, allowing thousands of Palestinians to walk through the gaps. These operational failures and weaknesses were among a wide array of logistical and intelligence lapses by the Israeli security services that paved the way for the Gazan incursion into southern Israel. According to four senior Israeli security officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity in order to discuss a sensitive matter and their early assessment of what went wrong. Honestly, can I just say one thing? I truly do feel as though the fact that these guys with their AKs were able to breach the defenses of Israel, the most well-protected and armed place that isn't America, pretty much. And like, they were just able to do it, like, with very on-the-ground, boots on the ground. They used paramotors? Like, that really does, like, throw a wrench in the argument that, oh, what do Americans need guns for? What do you think, you'll be able to overthrow the government if there's some fascist takeover? No, they just use drones to take you out. And it's like, okay, well, why is this happening? Like, why is this able to happen then? The brazen infiltration of more than 20 Israeli towns and army bases in that raid was the worst breach of Israel's defenses in 50 years and shattered the nation's sense of security. For hours, the strongest military in the Middle East was rendered powerless to fight back against a far weaker enemy, leaving villages defenseless for most of the day against squads of attackers who killed more than 900 Israelis, including soldiers in their underwear, abducted at least 150 people, overran at least 4 military camps, and spread out across more than 30 square miles of Israeli territory. The 4 officials said the success of the attack, based on their early assessment, was rooted in a slew of security failures by Israel's intelligence community and military, including failure by intelligence officers to monitor key communication channels used by Palestinian attackers, over-reliance on border surveillance equipment that was easily shut down by attackers, allowing them to raid military bases and slay soldiers in their beds, clustering of commanders in a single border base that was overrun in the opening phase of the incursion, preventing communication with the rest of the armed forces, and a willingness to accept at face value assertions by Gaza military leaders made on private channels that the Palestinians knew were being monitored by Israel, that they were not preparing for battle. Here's a quote. "We spend billions and billions on gathering intelligence on Hamas," said Yoel Guzanski, a former senior official at Israel's National Security Council. Then, in a second, he added, everything collapsed like dominoes. The first failure took root months before the attack, as Israeli security chiefs made incorrect assumptions about the extent of the threat that Hamas posed to Israel from Gaza. Hamas stayed out of 2 fights in the past year, allowing Palestinian Islamic Jihad, a smaller group in Gaza, to take on Israel alone. Last month, Hamas leadership also ended a period of rioting along the border in an agreement brokered by Qatar, giving the impression that they were not looking for an escalation. "Hamas is very, very restrained and understands the implications of further defiance," said Chaki Hanigbi? I can't pronounce that name. Israel's national security advisor, in a radio interview 6 days before the assault. When Israeli intelligence officials briefed senior security chiefs last week about the most urgent threats to the country's defenses, they focused on the dangers posed by Lebanese militants along Israel's northern border. The challenge posed by Hamas was barely mentioned. Hamas is deterred, the briefers said, according to one of the security officials. In calls, Hamas operatives, who talked to each other when tapped by Israeli intelligence agents, also gave the sense that they sought to avoid another war with Israel so soon after a damaging 2-week conflict in May 2021. According to 2 of the Israeli officials, Israeli intelligence, they said, is now looking into whether those calls were real or staged. The next failure was operational. 2 of the officials said that the Israeli border surveillance system was almost entirely reliant on cameras, sensors, and machine guns that are operated remotely. Israeli commanders had grown overly confident in the system's impregnability. They thought that the combination of remote surveillance and arms, barriers above ground, and a subterranean wall to block Hamas from digging tunnels into Israel made mass infiltration unlikely, reducing the need for significant numbers of soldiers to be physically stationed along the border line itself. With the system in place, the military started reducing the number of troops there, moving them to other areas of concern, including the West Bank, according to Israel Ziv, a retired major general who commanded ground forces in the south for many years, served as the head of the IDF's operations division from 2003 to 2005, and was recently recruited into the reserves again because of the war. The thinning of the forces seemed reasonable because of the construction of the fence and the aura they created around it, as if it were invincible, that nothing would be able to pass it, he said. But the remote control system had a vulnerability. It could also be destroyed remotely. Hamas took advantage of that weakness by sending aerial drones to attack the cellular towers that transmitted signals to and from the surveillance system. According to the officials, and also drone footage circulated by Hamas on Saturday and analyzed by the New York Times. Without cellular signals, the system was useless. Soldiers stationed in control rooms behind the front lines did not receive alarms that the fence separating Gaza and Israel had been breached and could not watch video showing them where the Hamas attackers were bulldozing the barricades. In addition, the barrier turned out to be easier to break through than Israeli officials had expected. What are you guys reposting? These are the paramotors? Oh, they did use paramotors. My bad. Man, they've got like super paramotors that can come in for a ground landing with wheels. You can shoot from one of those. Yeah. Okay, guys. Fuck Hamas. Fuck Hamas. I'm making it very clear. But also, that's fucking awesome. Alright? That idea is awesome. Okay? You can recognize when the bad guys had a cool idea. Yeah, it's the Rust... Oh my god, it's the Rust minicopter. Oh my god. A pillow. It's the Rust minicopter. You're completely right. Let me get an image. Bro, what if you thought the Iron Dome was secure, but then Hamas simply said... God. Odds are they're called the Rust Division. I hope so. That allowed more than 1,500 Gazan fighters to surge through nearly 30 points along the border, some of them in hang gliders that flew over the top of the barricades, and reached at least 4 Israeli military bases without being intercepted. Photos shared by one of the Israeli officials showed that scores of Israeli soldiers were then shot as they slept in their dorms. Some were still wearing their underclothes. The second operational failure was the clustering of leaders from the Army's Gaza division in a single location along the border. Once the base was overrun, most of the senior officers were killed, injured, or taken hostage, according to 2 of the Israeli officials. That situation, combined with the communication problems caused by the drone strikes, prevented a coordinated response. This kept anyone along the border from grasping the breadth of the assault, including the commanders who rushed from elsewhere in Israel to launch a counterattack. Understanding what the picture was of the different terrorist attacks was very difficult, said Brigadier General Dan Goldfuss, an Israeli commander who helped lead the counterattack. At one point on the ground, the general encountered by chance a commander from another brigade. There and then, the 2 men decided on an ad hoc basis which village their respective units would try to retake. We decided just between ourselves, the general said, and that's how we went by from one village to another. All of this meant it was hard, especially in the early stages, to communicate the gravity of the situation to the military high command in Tel Aviv. As a result, no one there sensed the immediate need for a massive rapid air cover, even as social media emerged with reports of attacks in many communities. It took hours for the Air Force to arrive over much of the area, even though it has bases just minutes away in flying time, according to 2 of the Israeli officials and survivors of the attack. The fallout has been catastrophic for Israel's security, as well as potentially damaging to its reputation in the region as a reliable military partner. Aww. Before Saturday, Israel was an asset to many countries in the region on security issues, Mr. Guzhansky said. The image now is that Israel is not an asset. The Israeli security services do not dispute the scale of their initial failure, but they say that it can only be investigated after the war ends. We'll finish this, said Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hecht, a military spokesman, as the army attempted to regain control of the communities on Saturday. But he said, you know that this will be investigated. All right, guys. I want to give a little bit of insight to my take on all this, all right? This is probably one of the most morally complicated topics I've ever had to discuss on stream. At least in my opinion. I'm going to give a little bit of, like, background, at least from what I know about the Israel-Palestine conflict, and, you know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if you actually can substantiate that you know what you're talking about, and you can add extra details if I miss certain important details, but this is the gist of it as far as I'm, you know, generally aware. What is now most of the land that is Israel, used to belong to the Palestinians. They were towns and villages that basically got overtaken by Israel and made into settlements, as they called them, which were brutally taken away and the Palestinians forced out. And whether it be prior to this or following this, this resulted in a massive increase in the amount of political opposition towards Israel in the region. Along comes, or was already existing, I actually don't know, Hamas, and Hamas basically starts attacking Israeli forces and land and, like, just general populace as much as possible, launching missiles, ground force attacks, mostly pretty fruitlessly, and in response, Israel would just, like, demolish an entire block of the Gaza Strip. Just demolish it and kill tons of civilians, which of course would result in the support for Hamas within Gaza increasing, and the support for the IDF within Israel increasing as well. Every attack between the two just results in emboldening either side, which just results in a further, and this is not, you can't argue against this fact. Each attack by either side increases the amount of, like, violence. They're just escalating back and forth. Now, my understanding of Hamas is that they legitimately want to, like, slaughter Israel. Like, if Israel just, like, if the IDF just laid down their arms and surrendered, Hamas would roll in and, like, literally Holocaust millions of Jews. Like, they would do that just immediately. That is what they want to do. They want to go in and Holocaust millions of Jews. And that's not great. That's a pretty big problem. And what's also a pretty big problem is all the innocent children and bystanders that get glassed in Gaza by the IDF. Neither side and neither scenario is good. I genuinely don't know what the solution is. This is literally one of the most notoriously difficult to solve socio-political, like, foreign policy issues literally in all of the world ever. There's no clear good guy or bad guy, because frankly, both sides are pretty bad. It's just the, it's just the, like, bystanders that are the good guys. Yeah, nearly 50% of Palestine is children. Is that true? That is an insane statistic. Yeah, so that kind of gives you a little bit of perspective on whenever there's massive civilian casualties from Israel, a lot of it is children, as I said before. Yeah, 50% of Palestine is 14 and under. Jesus Christ, the median age is 18. So yeah, a lot of the soldiers are young men, like 17, 16, 18, 19-year-old men. I mean, you saw the picture of the Hamas soldiers in that pickup truck with their AKs. Those were some fresh-faced looking lads underneath the masks. They look like they should be playing Fortnite. The only AK they should be holding is in a video game. Need to sanction the fuck out of Israel? Do you guys know what the truth of it is, guys? We've got massive political, Israel existing as essentially like an abroad military base for America is extremely valuable for our holdings in the Middle East. But on top of that, the fundamentalist Christian right plays a massive part in this. How many of you guys are aware of the event involving Israel that has to happen for the rapture to occur in the Bible? The Jews, God's chosen people, have to have control of the Holy Land for the rapture to occur and for Jesus to return. It's one of the prerequisites that a lot of fundamentalist American Christians believe. So a lot of the support for Israel in America comes from the fact that the Jews controlling the Holy Land in their mind means that the world's primed for the rapture and for the return of Jesus. That's a big part of it. I'm surprised not as many people know about this. I could probably bring up a good video about it. Oh, here's a good... Noam Chomsky. Why does the U.S. support Israel 7 years ago? Let's hope this was a not cringe Noam Chomsky take. He can be a little cringe from time to time, from what I've heard.
The United States support Israel. Well, there's a history, and a very interesting one, that actually goes back a long time.
I'm actually going to boost this video because old man talk quiet and slow.
One thing to remember is that Christian Zionism is a very powerful force, which goes back long before Jewish Zionism. In England, particularly, Christian Zionism was a powerful force among British elites. It's part of the motivation for the Balfour Declaration and for Britain's support for Jewish colonization of Israel.
Chomsky is Jewish, yeah.
The Bible said, and that's a big part of British elite culture. Same in the United States. Woodrow Wilson was a devout Christian who read the Bible every day. So did Harry Truman. In the Roosevelt administration, one of the leading officials, Harold Ickes, once described the return of the Jews to Palestine as the greatest event in history. It's realizing the lesson of the Bible. These are deeply religious countries in which the biblical commands, so-called, are taken quite literally. Also, this is just part of colonization. This is the last phase of European colonization. And notice that the countries that are most strongly in support of Israel are not just the United States. It's the United States, Australia, and Canada, the offshoots of England, Anglosphere sometimes called, unusual forms of imperialism. These are settler colonial societies, societies in which not like India, not like the British in India, say, societies, South Africa was a little like this, or Algeria under the French, settler colonial societies in which the settlers came in, essentially eliminated the native population, also driven by religious principles, very religious groups driven by Christian Zionism. Those are major cultural factors. There are also significant geostrategic factors. You go back to 1948, there was actually a split between the State Department and the Pentagon in the United States over how to react to the new state of Israel. The State Department was not committed strongly to Israeli conquests, the establishment of the state, and was concerned about the refugees. It wanted an implementation of the refugee problem. The Pentagon, on the other hand, was very impressed with Israel's military potential. The Israeli military successes, if you look back at the internal record and declassified, the Joint Chiefs of Staff described Israel as the second largest military force in the region after Turkey and a potential base for U.S. power in the region. That continued. Can't run through the whole record, but in 1958, when there was a serious crisis in the region, Israel was the only state that
Thank you, Chomsky. Now never say anything on Ukraine again.
Strongly cooperated with Britain and the United States, and it won plenty of support from the governments and the military for that reason. 1967 is when the current relations with Israel were pretty much established. Israel performed a major service to the United States by destroying a secular Arab nationalism, a major enemy of the United States, and supporting radical Islam, which the U.S. supported. And it continues right until the present. Right now, we saw an example of that just during the latest Gaza attack. You recall that at one point, Israel began to run out of munitions during the assault, despite the fact that it's armed to the teeth. The United States provided Israel with additional munitions through the Pentagon. And notice where they were taken from. These were U.S. munitions pre-positioned in Israel for eventual use by U.S. forces. One of many signs of how Israel is regarded as essentially a military offshoot of the United States. Very close intelligence relations that go way back.
They're basically like a stockpile for us, a proxy, just a little nodule through which we can maintain control of that like area of the world, at least in our minds. And that's a big reason why a lot of American, intelligence supports Israel and wants to keep the best interest of Israel in mind. But on top of that, the fundamentalist Christian right in America believes that Israel has to exist and, Palestine has to belong to the Jews in order for Jesus to return and for the rapture to occur. And you know that these nutjob crazy motherfuckers actually believe that shit and genuinely think it is their job to ensure that that occurs. So it's pretty concerning. Yeah, they call it the only democracy in the Middle East, yeah. I really don't know what the correct answer is on this issue. Like, usually I like to be able to say, like, oh, the correct take on this is so obvious. Here's the evidence, yada, yada. But genuinely, like, it's not like Israel can stand down and no longer defend itself. Like, that doesn't work. Like, it has to go on the offensive against Hamas to some extent. Like, if Hamas wins, they'll exterminate millions of people that live in Israel. And if Israel continues fighting back in the way that it is, not only will fighting escalate and will violence escalate and the conflict and the amount of people hurt escalate, but there'll be continuously more children, primarily, killed in the crossfire. International law needs to be applied equally, like 10 years ago. I don't know. Like, if I were to think of the most radical, insane, out-of-the-box solution I could think of, it would be like a full-force invasion of U.S. troops, boots on the ground, into Gaza to try to, like, suppress and quell violence and be like, just do a full-on, like, deployment of troops to, like, basically police the entire state and root out Hamas, build a, like, democratic government, and potentially, like, sway the general populace of Palestine in favor of said democratic government, in not too dissimilar ways to the way that the U.S. did in Kabul, in Afghanistan. When the U.S. came into Afghanistan, I mean, the people of Afghanistan weren't all that happy about it. They weren't too happy about the occupation, but fast forward to right before we left, and the majority of people in the capital were not in favor of the U.S. pulling out unless very particular peace talks have been made with the Taliban. And so, like, I don't think it's impossible for the U.S. to come into a country, instill a democratic government, and to gain support from the people that lived there for it, but it would have to be done correctly. But, I imagine a lot of people would be opposed to that too, and I imagine there'd be a lot of ways that could go wrong. Many ways, in fact. Xanderhall, you could use Article 42, I think, of the Uncharter to send in military observers that can try to limit conflict. Didn't work for Syria, but could for Israel. Yeah. I mean, like, you would need to put down, like, you have to understand, Israel's already unleashing a lot of, like, troops and firepower onto Gaza. I'm talking about, like, a insanely huge force of U.S. troops just combing the streets of Gaza to the point where it's like, all right, they are basically patrolling every road and every sidewalk. And that's the point where you've got it locked down. I don't even know how it would work, okay? I'm not a military strategist, but, like, that is the most out-of-the-box solution I can think of, because Hamas has to be dealt with. Like, Hamas is not a good group. Hamas is like, the beliefs and ideology that Hamas lives by, not very agreeable. I think it's pretty awful. They're not too far away from Nazis in the end goal of what they want to do, relatively. I mean, they plan to exterminate millions of Jews, so I mean, they're not exactly a great group. I'm not too in favor of those guys. We'd basically end up doing Israel's job for them. Yeah, but doing it in a less killing a bunch of civilians way. Like, yeah, America kills a lot of civilians and innocent people when we fight wars in places, but it's not even it's a drop in the bucket compared to Israel and what they do to Gaza. Oh my god, is it a drop in the bucket. Like, a lot of US soldiers are pretty, like, psychotic, but not that many of them. Like, a lot of them aren't going to be out there purposefully shooting children unless they're pretty sure that there's a threat. Like, meanwhile, you've got the IDF just nuking not nuking, but like just glassing entire blocks of residential, town every like other week, pretty much. Whoever opens up another one would be ruining their political chances. Yeah, they don't really play much defense roundabout. They should be the IOF. Anyway, that's pretty much the gist of it. That's the whole article. And I mean, it's pretty wild right now. I've seen a lot of pro-Israel support among the conservative right lately. Like, a lot more support for Israel and anti-Palestinian, like, a lot of it's, like, racist, too, honestly, from the right, especially on, like, dude bro podcasts that are, like, marginally right-leaning but don't really get into politics but have dipped into this issue. They've all made their support of Israel very, very clear, so... yeah, it's very interesting to see people who are, like, borderline Nazis and make Holocaust jokes and Hitler did nothing wrong jokes talk about how Israel is, like, a legitimate state that, is epically owning the evil Palestinians or whatever. Like, I don't know. It's bizarre to see. It's interesting.